Hello. We should start. So welcome to Wising. I'm John Bloomfield, the assistant curator at Wising, and curator of this exhibition, More of an Avalanche. Thank you all for coming to Wising on this what's turning out to be quite a nice day. We're very lucky to have some really brilliant speakers today who are going to help us unpack and explore some of the themes of More of an Avalanche. I hope you've had a chance to look around and to see the work that we've really been excited about over the last 12 months. If not, there will be some time during the break, and the exhibition doesn't actually finish until tomorrow afternoon. So if you wanted to spend the whole weekend at Wising, you could be more than welcome to do that. So I'm just going to say a few words about the exhibition before we begin. The first exhibition of the year at Wising traditionally presents work produced here over the previous 12 months. And one of the initial aims of this exhibition was to acknowledge that a lot of the work that goes on here is ephemeral, discursive, experimental, or still in development, and that an idea pursued in a formal symposium, a kitchen table discussion, or a brief moment during a DJ set could be as important as a material form. So I was very keen that the exhibition reflected the fact that the bedrock of Wising's programme is really made up of these kinds of moments: residencies, retreats, events, and a music festival. So it's an exhibition that attempts to temporarily pin things down, to take a snapshot of something that's always moving. And so with that in mind, I'm really excited that today's event will close the exhibition by agitating things and getting them to move again, by unfixing things. As you may know, the thematic starting point of the show was to think about sensitivity and the political importance of that. And already with today's event, we're at a remove from that and ready to explore some diverse sub-themes such as intergenerational conversation, sickness and crypt theory, anti-assimilation, and the dissolution of spaces for both critical conversation and club culture. So we'll begin by hearing from Nick Aikens, a curator at Eindhoven's Van Abbemuseum, co-curator of the fantastic The Places Here exhibition some of you may have seen at Nottingham Contemporary, South London Gallery, or MIMA last year, and curator of a brilliant new retrospective of Rasheed Araeen. Nick and I will have a conversation in which I'll invite him to draw on this research to contextualise More of an Avalanche. This will be followed by a conversation between Raju Rage and Trishna Shah in the gallery. So we first saw a version of Raju's installation, Undervalued Energetic Economy, when Raju was in residence at Wising last year, and the work has been, I would say, absolutely central to the development of this exhibition. So we're really pleased that Raju can be here and can be joined by Trishna, one of the contributors to the interview portion of the work. And then following a short break, we will hear 3 presentations expanding on some of the exhibition's themes. Artist Leah Clements will talk about a newly forged network of art practitioners interested in issues around sickness and crypt theory, who Leah has invited to be in residence at Wising later in the year. Leah has brought along a new virtual reality work that explores some of these ideas, Sickbed, that you are invited to explore during the break, so that's available at reception. And then current artist in residence Phoebe Collings-James will present research around a new work she is developing with last year's interesting Negro Jamila Johnson-Small. This new collaborative work will be embodied through a symbiotic relationship between dance, music, and sculpture, and we'll ask what an anti-assimilationalist practice might look and sound like in 2018. Following that, we'll hear a presentation from Elijah, a DJ, producer, and co-founder of the label Butters, and current associate artistic director of the Lighthouse in Brighton. Elijah will be discussing Last Dance, a project he instigated that looks into the rapid changes affecting UK club culture. Finally, we'll have an open discussion, which Nick will chair, in which we'll get a chance to connect some of these disparate themes and hopefully to hear from you in the audience. So at this point, I just wanted to quickly mention that we've also been joined in the audience by 2 of the artists in the exhibition, Harold Offe, who you might recognise from the photo series in the gallery, and Zinzi Minot, who produced the fantastic Gunfingers and Opaque Bullets film in the Open Studio. So we may be lucky enough to hear from them as well. Okay, so just to formally introduce Nick, Nick Aikens has been a tutor at the Dutch Art Institute Art Praxis since 2013. He's currently a curator at the Van Abbemuseum. Recent and ongoing projects are focused on the 1980s and specifically the UK Black Arts movement, and a retrospective monograph on Rasheed Araeen. So the idea of this conversation is perhaps quite perverse. It's to introduce the themes of one exhibition by talking about a completely different project, but I guess the hope is that by revisiting Nick's research into the 1980s in the UK and the Black Arts movement, we might be able to build up a bit of a historical context for what's happening in More of an Avalanche, and to look at this show with a longer historical lens, and to kind of maybe draw out some other questions. So, Nick, would you be able to start by saying some brief words about the two projects, or the kind of overlapping research projects?
Sure. So, firstly, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, John and everyone at Wising, for having me. It's lovely to be here on the last weekend of your show, and congratulations on the show. It's really wonderful to see, having seen the images. So yeah, as you said, it's slightly strange, and one feels slightly uncomfortable coming into a moment where you're celebrating the end of your show and then to start talking about one's own projects, which happened elsewhere. But maybe it can serve to, as you say, pull out some threads and give a kind of longer lens. So maybe I'll begin with the Places Here exhibition, which was a show that began actually in another guise in Eindhoven, where I work, under the title Thinking Back, a montage of black art in Britain. And that was part of a larger exhibition that looked at the 1980s from different perspectives across Europe. And the aim of that exhibition was to try and analyze or think about the importance of the 1980s for today. We were working with a number of partners, collaborators in different institutions in Europe, who at different moments had all arrived at the 1980s, all thought about the 1980s as this moment where this very important change takes place between how governments and state and civil society, the public, relate to one another. A really important shift seemed to take place in the 1980s, where governments and the state governments and the public started to mean different things to one another. And that could happen in the transition in Spain after the end of Franco's dictatorship. It can happen in the end of the disintegration of Yugoslavia, or it can happen in Thatcher's Britain. So this 1980s is this really important moment where we're living with the ramifications of that today. And within that, I, being British, wanted to think about the 1980s from the perspective of Britain. And of course, one begins with Thatcher when one thinks of the 1980s Britain. And so I started this research for the 1980s Britain, reading Stuart Hall's text around where he introduces the term Thatcherism. And from there, to cut a very long story short, I went on a kind of a journey to discover the group of artists, thinkers, filmmakers, activists who've become associated with this not unproblematic term, the Black Arts movement, which none of the artists associated with it would adhere to or conform to, but it allows us to kind of group a sort of certain discussion together. And so within the show in Eindhoven, it was kind of set in context to these other European perspectives. I was then invited to develop that show in Nottingham Contemporary with the director Sam Thorne, and then it became a kind of standalone exhibition, and a very different thing for many different reasons. You're not looking at it as this kind of polyphonic, to use your term, configuration, but you're looking at it as a standalone thing. It's in Nottingham, in the Midlands, where many of these conversations between the artists happened. And of course, it's the most kind of, although there's been lots of work into this period in the 1980s and looking at black artists in Britain in the 1980s, it was the kind of most ambitious and largest coming together of some of these artists. So it becomes a whole different thing, a whole different enterprise, and quite sort of loaded in a certain way. And one of the premises of the exhibition, both in the Van Aber and then in Nottingham and then in South London, was to think about this term montage when thinking about the 1980s. And to think about montage both as something that happens within many of the artists' work, so practices of collage, montage in filmmaking that's happening with the film collectives who are working in the 80s, but also to think about it as a curatorial device, as a way of working. How do you bring different elements together to create a snapshot of something in a particular moment? And how do you bring different histories together? How do you bring the 1980s together with the present moment? How do you think about this juncture, this constellation of different histories and moments? And of course, for the artists working in the 1980s, that was really important. How could Lubaina Himid think about Toussaint Louverture and the first successful uprising in Haiti? How could she think about that in relation to Thatcher's Britain? You know, so this idea of montage of history kind of reforming in the present became a very important device within the show. And of course, this allowed me to say, okay, this is not about marking a beginning and an end of a movement. It's not about tracking a certain chronology. It's about bringing together a kind of conversation, bringing together these different elements, and to put them alongside one another and to say, okay, this is not fixed. This is constantly in flux, constantly in movement. And so in Nottingham, we had over 40 artists, over 100 works, a series of archival presentations that were curated by people either working in the 80s or who have since formed archives, artists like Marlene Smith, Claudette Johnson, Keith Piper, who were working on the Black Art Group research project, Lubaina Himid with her Making History's Visible archive in Preston, June Giovanni, who has a film archive. So to bring those archives within the show and to kind of really think about how histories are formed, how they're archived, and to also contextualize a lot of the material within the exhibition. So that exhibition was in its kind of largest guise, I guess, in Nottingham, and was then reconfigured in the South London Gallery later in the year, and also in Middlesbrough. And I think what was so interesting about having the opportunity to rethink those exhibitions is you could really stress the fact that with different combinations of works, different combinations of artists, different combinations of archival materials, different stories emerge, different histories can be told. And I think that was one of the most important things for me about the exhibition, is that we understand history, these histories in toto, as very fluid, as things that are always changing depending where you're looking from, depending who's telling them, depending the context you're in. And I think it's something that is probably resonates with the exhibition here, both in terms of this idea of a polyphony, but also in terms of the kind of intergenerational perspectives that the exhibition speaks to. So that may be a bit rambling, but that kind of hopefully gives some sense of the Places Here exhibition. Rasheed's retrospective is more straightforward to talk about in a certain sense, because it was quite a classic retrospective. Rasheed Araeen, who's an artist who has been working for the past 60 years. Since 1964, he's been living in London. He was born just outside Karachi. He has been is a painter, sculptor, perhaps probably most well known as the founder and editor of the Text Journal, really vital contributor to post-colonial, anti-colonial theory in the 90s and 2000s. Rasheed's retrospective came out of the 80s show. So when I was doing the 80s show, and Rasheed was such an important figure for many of the artists working in the 80s. He was an older generation, and he was invited to speak at the first National Black Art Convention in 82 in Wolverhampton. Of course, he curated The Other Story in 89. And I was realizing when researching the Places Here exhibition that Rasheed as an artist, as a thinker, as a figure, was everywhere. And then I started looking back at his work into the 70s, his performance work in the 70s, going back into the 60s, his minimalist sculptures, and even to his paintings in Karachi. And then going forward to more recent work, and realizing there was this extraordinary body of work and this extraordinary story of Rasheed's that had never been told. And as a curator working in a museum, this is gold dust. You're suddenly, okay, here's the story that needs to be told. This needs to be made public. And so I went to see Rasheed in his studio, and very quickly it said, okay, we need to make this retrospective. We need to make this chronological tracking of Rasheed's contribution and Rasheed's story. So the show is divided into 5 chapters, which roughly demarcate different periods in his life and his work. And we did a big monograph that went with it, which included kind of 500 works, to really make public this body of work, what it was, because there was bits and bobs here and there, but no one had put it on paper and say, okay, this is Rasheed Araeen, this is his work, and that's what's there. The show has just finished in Eindhoven, and it will tour to Geneva, to Mamco in Geneva, and then it will come to the UK. It will be in Baltic in October, and then on to Moscow. So if you're in the north in October, please come and see it. There's my plug.
Thank you, Nick. So in that show, which is arranged chronologically, as you've said, we see an artist arriving in the UK and facing a form of institutional deflection. So there's a period, firstly, where Rasheed Araeen is rejected by various institutions, where he has trouble showing work, quite simply. And this is followed by attempts to both kind of change those institutions from within. So the kind of correspondence with, I think, is it the Arts Council about organising the other story?
Yeah. It's with the South Bank Centre. Yeah.
South Bank Centre. So, so to change those institutions from within. So organising the other story at the Hayward Gallery, but then also to build his own institutions with first Black Manifesto in the 1970s and then Third Text slightly later on. So I just wondered if, for a bit of context, you could sketch out the funding and institutional landscape as it was in those decades for Black, Asian and minority ethnic artists. So just quite simply, where would the opportunities have been?
So I'll talk about it from the perspective of Rasheed, because there I'm on perhaps safer ground, rather than pretending to be an expert on the minutiae of funding in the 70s. But so Rasheed writes to the South Bank Centre, to Andrew Dempsey, in 78, with the first idea to do a survey, a kind of intergenerational, again, survey of artists, diasporic artists working in Britain in the post-war period. And he suggests this show because there's just been in South Bank Centre an exhibition of all women artists, and he says this is an incredibly important moment for the South Bank Centre in Britain. Now is the time to do a show of Black artists in Britain and to analyse their kind of contribution towards modernism. He doesn't get a response for, 6-7 months or so, and it takes 11 years before this exhibition is subsequently realised. Those 11 years in terms of funding possibilities mark a huge kind of seismic shift in the way places like the Arts Council, Greater London, Channel 4, all start making money available to working with Black artists, working with different community organisations. So I suppose in the 1970s you could say that there was no possibilities whatsoever, and Rasheed's suggestion was as I say, took 6 months even to get a response to say that this was not a possibility. By 1989, the other story takes place at the South Bank Centre. I mean, we can talk about what happens after that, actually, which I think is equally important. But through the 1980s, through the GLC, through BFI, there is a huge shift in terms of resources being made available. How they're used, we can again talk about and discuss. But that's when the shift occurs in the 1980s.
Okay. So sort of, so in that kind of initial period of frustration, where's using Rasheed as a case study, where was he able to show or kind of have critical feedback about his work? Where would work have been shown and discussed?
So in the case of Rasheed, the only space really in the 70s was Artists for Democracy, and this formerly Signals, which was run by David Medella, where he was doing a really interesting program of international artists. This is where Rasheed had his first solo show in the mid-70s, where he first did the performance Packy Bastard, Portrait of an Artist as a Black Person. And David Medella for Rasheed was a really significant figure in terms of his kind of political and theoretical education, in a way. Of course, when you come to the 80s and many of the artists working in the places here, they're doing a lot of self-organizing. So the shows they're curating the shows, they're organizing the shows, they're putting them on, firstly in, kind of university spaces, they're organizing the convention. Like self-organization, collective organization is key to the extraordinary energy that's happening at the beginning of the 80s. By mid-80s, you've got a lot of the galleries, interestingly, outside Europe. I saw on Raju's diagram, London-centric was a was a thing that came up. A lot of the activities happening outside London. Places like Blue Coat in Liverpool, in Sheffield. These institutions, and you go to some of the regional collections, they've got amazing work from the 1980s because they were the ones paying attention, they were the ones buying it. So again, by the mid-80s, you've got this shift, and then of course, in 89, late 80s, you've got the Whitechapel Gallery show, From Two Worlds. You've got The Other Story in 89. Then it's kind of, London wakes up and takes notice. But it took a long time for that to happen.
I mean, one of the things that's really striking, looking back at that, at the moment when funding starts to be kind of released for groups like Black Audio or Sankofa Film and Videos, just to think about the spaces where those works would be seen. In More of an Avalanche, there are two works by the Newsreel Collective, who were a group who worked with young people in the East End of London to make kind of educational issue-based films. So there's one that kind of really thinks about race and racism, Divide and Rule Never, and one, True Romance, etc., that thinks about sex, gender, and stereotypes. And one of the original members of the group, Paul Morrison, came to see the show, and I asked him, like, where would these films have been shown, and they were, because as they were educational, as you might expect, they were shown in schools, but also in all of these kind of spaces which have like disappeared now. So like youth clubs, community centres. He said it was quite common to have rooms made available by local council, and I mean that's kind of maybe like in an educational context, but was that kind of, do you think, did you come across that kind of looking at kind of visual arts?
I mean, I think also a lot of the film collectives, for example, Black Audio, Cheddar, Sankofa, they're organising a lot of workshops, community-based workshops in terms of like how to make film, how to edit film, how to produce film, and a lot of these things are happening on quite a low-key level. And you've got, that's made possible because in the instance of the film collectives, Channel 4 are giving long-term funding to these organisations, which is extraordinary. Imagine Channel 4 now giving like 2-3 year bursaries to a film collective, a young film collective. So part of that remit was to go out and do workshops, filmmaking workshops. And so there was a lot of activity that was happening away from gallery spaces and away from institutional spaces.
That's quite interesting. It was a sort of stipulation of the funding that it would
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, you give a context for the work as one where a generation of black artists are coming through art school and looking for images of black people in the media and art history, but are only presented with a very white European art history. So in this exhibition, More of an Avalanche, many of the artists have been able to look back and see work produced by the very generation that you've researched for those projects. And there are kind of many examples of influence, even of direct conversation or pedagogical links between the two. And kind of intergenerational conversation sort of really emerges as a key theme in the show. But I was wondering, where ultimately did the generation you researched have to turn to find what they were looking for? I mean, you gave the example of Lubena Hamid looking back at kind of big history, looking at like, Toussaint Louverture.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story that I was mentioning, this was Claudette Johnson, who and Marlene Smith talk about, a lot of the artists talking about going to their art teachers at art school and saying where are images of, in Claudette's case, where are images of black women, and art teachers saying quite simply there aren't any, they're not there, they're not there, and the black artists aren't there in terms of the art history. So this was like just a kind of de facto inbuilt exclusion or amnesia or blindness that was there in art schools. I think it's also really important to say that when we're talking about these artists, we're talking about many different positions, groups, so I would not want to kind of give some sort of homogenous overview. But you've got for artists like Eddie Chambers working in the Black Art Group, they're looking very much at like what's happening in America and Pan-Africanism. They're looking at kind of much more radical thinkers. You've got the filmmakers who are really reliant on a lot of the film festivals coming in, like Third Eye Film Festival, looking at third cinema makers from Latin America, from West Coast America. So they're really having to look outside Britain, that's for sure, except maybe with the case of Rasheed, and they're often looking to political activists, to theorists, rather than artists.
Yeah, Stuart Hall in Birmingham, and
yeah, exactly.
So one of the really crucial kind of keywords in More of an Avalanche is the word snowflake. So it's a term that relatively recently has begun to be used as a pejorative and to shut down complaints. So if you call someone a snowflake, you reduce their complaint to whining and their vulnerability to oversensitivity. You tell them that they shouldn't be listened to. So that's the context in which one makes a complaint today. And so much of the work in this show almost anticipates being criticised for oversensitivity. I just wondered how that climate compares to the period you researched. I know there's a precedence in terms like the loony left or political correctness gone mad. But I wondered whether the artists you looked at needed to think about how their work might be received by an audience that would be unsympathetic in this way, or whether perhaps it wasn't really a concern at all.
I think it's probably more that it was that society in the 70s, certainly in the late 70s, was just more openly racist. I think Rasheed talks about it in the late 60s, early 70s as saying racism was overt and it was legal. So the idea to be sort of called out for your position, it hadn't got to that step yet. Even it was just still at the stage of overt racism. So first it was about 1979 in Britain is the year that the most candidates from the National Front are fielded in elections. You know, this is it's at the end of the Labour government, which has economically depressed the country. It's a really fractured, fraught moment in Britain. So racism is just everywhere. So I think it's quite a different context in that sense. So first and foremost, it's about having your voice heard, having your image seen. It's a question of visibility and audibility before it gets to anything near ideas of political correctness. You see what I mean? It's kind of there's still a long road to go.
I guess you kind of maybe see that transition in a work like That Rush, which Isaac Julian's That Rush, which is in the gallery, which looks at how, I guess, essentially how the right talk to each other and how kind of racist tactics would have to be kind of hidden, camouflaged, how they become more sophisticated, kind of when they go underground.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think seeing that work, which is what, like 92, 93?
93.
Yeah. And it's so resonant today, no? You can imagine the very similar talk shows happening
yeah.
At the moment in the US and, maybe here as well.
I think we are running... we've run out of time, but...
on time. We haven't run out. We're beautifully on time.
It's the innate timekeeping sense. But we will now be moving through to the gallery, where we'll hear from Raju and Trishna. I'm just going to give a slightly more kind of longer introduction to Raju and Trishna before we move through. So Raju Rage is an interdisciplinary artist who is proactive about using art, education and activism to forge creative survival. They primarily use their non-conforming body as a vehicle of embodied knowledge to bridge the gap between disconnected bodies, between theory and practice, text and the body, and aesthetics and the political substance. They work in performance, sculpture, soundscapes, and moving image, focusing on techniques of resistance and utilizing everyday objects and everyday life experiences in communicating narratives around gender, race, and culture. They investigate history, memory, and trauma with an emphasis on colonial legacy, its continuation and impact on the body. So Raju will be joined by Trishna Shah, a contributor to the interview portion of the work. Trishna has been a roots reggae DJ and singer for over 15 years, building connections in the UK roots reggae sound system scene. She co-founded Uprising, a Cambridge-based promotions company who have organised events throughout the UK. She's a writer and contributor to Galdem magazine and is part of Off-Road Circus, an organisation that combines circus and social activism. So we'll maybe return to some of these questions later, but for now, if we can move through to the gallery for Raju and Trishna.
I've got Trishna here, who's also a participant in this work, which is titled The Undervalued Energetic Economy. And it's a work in progress. It's work that I started to develop while I was here at Wising on residency last year in March to May. So over that 6 to 8 week period, I was at a point in my artistic career where I was doing a lot of performance-based work and wanting to not do that anymore, and thinking a lot about the conditions of making work that I was under, my peers were under, mostly as, I guess, artists of colour within the UK context, and so I used this period of residency to kind of really try and untangle this, but realising there was a huge entanglement with everything that I was experiencing in my kind of artistic career. And so, my background, I guess, was more kind of in self-organising and DIY culture in the early 2000s in London. And I was involved, I guess, not by choice necessarily, but just kind of dealing with everyday struggle, what that meant, getting involved with various activisms. So actually I know Zinzi from back in those times as well, and that's how we met, actually. So yeah, and then I had also got involved. I've been in art school, and I studied in art school, and with all the frustrations that you mentioned around Rasheed, Araeen, and speaking about, Nick was speaking about me and Zinzi just turned to each other and we were like, nothing's changed, so kind of the same concern. So I'm not going to go over those again, but just to say those are kind of reiterated of having that same experience of frustrations of, why are we not being taught about this at school? Where are these histories? Where are the other artists like me? Or in my specific case, finding artists that were other artists of colour but not necessarily trans or queer. So yeah, just kind of that struggle. I also got involved in education work because I did at some point become quite politicized about these issues and speaking about them, and that kind of attracted institutions. So institutions were interested in kind of me doing the diversity and inclusion work, and that's something that a lot of us fall into. So I was just trying to kind of make sense of it all. So I kind of was at a point where I was like, let me kind of get to grips with this. In the meantime, I'd set up an arts collective with it was just me and Evan Ifekoya, and then really Low and Raisa Kibbe joined, and it was kind of an open group, and people came in and dropped out again. Zinzi participated as well, and many different people who were creative practitioners and artists and activists came to those spaces. So we created an arts collective to kind of to have space, to carve space where we could actually come together and discuss some of these issues, whether it was about ranting about them, whether it was about sharing resources, sharing each other's work, having a space to crit each other. And so collective creativity, we kind of provided the space where we were having a lot of roundtable conversation, it was a really important moment because, and this started in like 2014, it was a period where we started to then look at the Black Arts movement and do a lot of, I would say, unarchiving of those archives. So part of that involved having cross-generational, intergenerational conversation with some of those artists directly. So we were lucky, Sonia Boyce, Keith Piper, Lubena Hamid was really influential. We had conversations with her. We went to the archive, the Making Visibles archive in Preston. So we started to begin these conversations. So we were kind of unpacking, what happened in history, what's happening now, how these things connect. I was trying to connect all these different areas of my life, which felt quite separated as well, within activism, education, and artistic practice. And so I developed this map while I was here to just kind of really try and untangle it, and then realizing that it's a huge entanglement, actually. So this is a work in progress. Some of these there's other links to be made, there's other things to be added. It was a series where, I don't know, were you there, Divya, where we did a kitchen table conversation? No. Okay, so there was another part of the process where I kind of opened it up to people to kind of, in a kind of kitchen table setting where they had these placemats and they could add to it or change it, or, but I realized that it's very much kind of a self-portrait in a sense of my world and me and my peers and what's around. But part of that was, this kind of need to question why we weren't coming up on this information in the archives, why it took so much to find that information, the accessibility to get to institutional archives even. So what I was thinking about in this project was to create a map, but also kind of a resource that will be a kind of on a digital platform that, so for example, if you click on one of these links, it kind of leads you to somewhere else, or to somebody's work, or to theory, or to, so it kind of becomes kind of an alternative archive. So I kind of started collecting and interviewing people who I thought were kind of, when I kind of made these things, I was like, who can I speak to about 696 legislation? Who can I speak to about different aspects of this? So I started to do these interviews, and I've compiled 4 of them, and one of them was Trishna, who maybe you want to introduce yourself, but you were an artist based here in Cambridge, and I was here in the time. So I was in Cambridge, so it made sense to kind of connect with you and find out what you were doing and how you were connecting art and activism. So maybe at this point, because otherwise you won't get to say anything.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the way we started the conversation was we were talking about music, and I grew up in a Gujarati family. My mum always used to force us to go to bhajans on a Friday night, which I absolutely hated because all my mates were able to go out to normal stuff. We used to have to go to bhajans, but that was sort of started my journey into music. I went to art school as well, but then I got pregnant, and sort of I don't find that much time now to do my art, but I guess I put more of my time into music. Being a mum, I think I have to focus on making money and stuff like that to buy things for the kids, like trainers, which I recently bought my daughter. She's got my first proper nice Nikes. You've seen the video. But it was nice to getting to know Raju. I think in our community, art isn't something that's valued. So you go and you say to your mum and dad, I want to go to art school. What are you talking about? I think that's a nice hobby, but actually you should go and do maths or something. So seeing Raju and what they were doing and how they were making all these links was really important. Actually, I met you about, 5 years ago. So I guess that sort of re-inspired me to get in touch with my art a little bit. And I know I dug out lots of my old paintings and stuff, WhatsApping you photos and stuff like that. Because I think that there's something about capitalism that takes me away from what I really want to be doing. So in a way, I understand this need to make money and have all the material stuff. But at the same time, my heart isn't happy unless I'm doing stuff that makes me happy, which is why these are really beautiful. I don't know if you guys have read these lists, but it's just, it's doing that stuff that is good for me, and it's sort of good for humanity too, because if I'm happy, I'm a good person and I do better things. And also my activism, the whole capitalism thing, job, all that takes me away from my activism too. But it's this fine line, and I'm quite happy sort of trying to dance it at the moment.
So can you speak to what you've been doing in Cambridge? You've been kind of building this music sound system group together and things like that, in terms of what you've had to experience and doing that here in Cambridge as well.
Yeah, okay, so there was this collective called Cambridge Revelation. It was mainly sort of a lot of Jamaican guys and a few other sort of white people, and they were sort of very inclusive. It was like a sound system collective. They had a sound system and we were all DJs, so it was quite, there was about 12, 15 DJs. That was when I'm 34, so that was when I was 16, 17. And we had a pub, we'd do a regular night, take the sound system in there. We used to take the sound system out to Strawberry Fair. And that's how I got into, I think I first started listening to Roots through that. I mean, obviously I knew like Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and things like that. And so what was nice about that was just a community of people of colour, really, a community of, I told you how some of the elders were really encouraging, like my friend Roddy, who you met, he was like, go on, buy tunes, go and get on the mic and stuff when I was shy. So that was beautiful to have that, because growing up in Cambridge is not like growing up in London where you're surrounded by lots of people of colour. You are the odd one out at school. You're the one with the oil in your hair, or you're the one whose family is speaking a weird language to you in the playground, and it's embarrassing. So actually to have that connection was important. And from that, Uprising came, which was just sort of jungle and reggae collective. Tonight we've got an event, so I'm not part of Uprising, I just get paid to go and play there now. I don't really want to do any of the organising, but I don't know if any of you know Demolition Man, jungle artist. You do. He's coming down tonight, so I'm playing there. So yeah, that's the progression. And now I guess the time that I get away from the kids, when I'm not at work, I'm focusing more on writing lyrics and making music. I was building my sound system. I was like, it's too much money, I can't put money into that. I'm trying to focus on the music as a way of expressing what I want to the youth. Yeah.
So yeah, Trishna's interview, goes into more background, kind of, her history of organising and creating this space for yourself, and how that also connects to the activism, because I know you also write and you're part of activism as well. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So
or why you came to that, or
Yeah, I guess I've always sort of written poetry and stuff like that. And sometimes issues just get to you. You see stuff in society and it just gets to you. And that's how I started writing for Galdem and contributing. It's a magazine. It's an online magazine that's written all by women of colour, but it's for anyone. It's stuff that's relevant to everyone. And I just get annoyed about things sometimes, and writing is a way to, you know, whether it's lyrics or an article, it's a way to express that, and hopefully that's going to be useful to someone.
Yeah, great, thanks. So my interest in kind of interviewing you and interviewing some of the other people, there's writers, poets, musicians, artists, and most of them connect with politics or activism in some way, but I am going to then move to kind of interview more activists, strict activist participants as well. I guess was to kind of give this some contextualization and some embodied experience of like what these narratives are, but also to kind of bring more nuance to them, because it can be really simplified, like, you know, diversity, inclusion, decolonizing, intersectionality, but actually what does that mean in kind of everyday living kind of practice? And so, you know, there are some issues around cultural appropriation, what that means, like just different nuances to what some of these are about and how they connect to each other. And my hope is to kind of build on that. And I think, I kind of set it up like a kitchen table, because I come from, I guess, this legacy of like not having space, like this kind of closing of youth centres that we talked about, and you know, the squatting becoming illegal, that kind of got rid of a lot of spaces that I was involved in the early 2000s in London Hackney, and rising rents and gentrification and so on has meant that a lot of us meet at kitchen table conversations and have done, and I've been involved in activism in Berlin as well, where that kind of happens there, because it's also very, like, this overt racism still exists in Germany, which maybe doesn't exist in the same way here, but there's, you know, things we talk about, things not shifting, but actually context, things have not shifted, but context have shifted, policy has shifted, and there's still institutional racism, right? So a lot of us kind of, come together outside of, or find safer spaces like kitchen table conversations, and this is a space where we can kind of have these conversations, debate, discuss, critique, and where knowledge is produced but isn't really recognized in the same way that this, you know, knowledges are recognized within institutions and how they're spoken about in conferences and in academia. And I guess it's also to kind of counteract how I see a lot of that becoming this discourse within kind of academia, to kind of bring it back to the kitchen table. And I was trained as a chef, and I also cook, and so that's part of my kind of everyday life as well. So but a lot of kind of current activist groups like Black Lives Matter, Sisters and Cut, and so on, meet in kitchen table conversation, kitchen tables, and we don't have spaces. We just actually, a group of us have put together an application for Raven Row. That's, I don't know if everyone's heard about Raven Row, but they're offering office space for a year. So, you know, kind of thinking about how we organise and share resources, produce knowledge, and really unpack these kind of these conversations, these links. I don't know if there's any more to say. Or
no, that's fantastic. I think that kind of brings us up to the break, and we can come back to some of these questions at the open discussion at the end.
Yeah, feel free to come up to me and ask questions. And also there's the interviews and the work here. There's other people's materials that I've also found inspiring that I've included, but it's an exhaustive list. There's just so much. There's so much that isn't here that I'm aware of. But again, this will probably take me a lifetime to kind of make into a kind of a digital resource that I'm hoping to do. Thank you very much.
Can the SoundCloud be accessed?
Yes, outside. Yeah.
So
And that's the idea, that it will be able to be accessible. And also the idea is also that I want to make it kind of an open source project so that other people can contribute, because there's always going to be things that are missing and lacking and other perspectives as well.
Yeah, the interviews are really great.
Thank you.
So Leah's presentation is first, and I'm just going to give a very short introduction. So Leah Clements is an artist based in London. Her practice is concerned with emotional experiences, the relationship between the psychological and the physical, and instances of self-loss into other people or worlds. During Leah's residency at Wising, she has invited collaborators Rebecca Bly, Yuma Breakdown, Eleanor Coleman, Alice Hattrick, and Lizzie Rose to form a new network of art practitioners who identify as CRIP, disabled, or otherwise non-conforming to standard ideas of good health. So we'll hear from Leah now.
Yep. Hello. So yeah, as John said, later this year I'm going to be in residence here at Wising to work on a project based around cripness and sickness. So crip is a term that maybe not everyone here will be familiar with. It describes a necessarily political position on illness and disability. Cripness subscribes to the social model of disability, which states that disability is caused by the way society is organised, rather than by a person's impairment or difference. It looks at ways of removing barriers that restrict life choices for disabled people. So an example I'd give is humans invented stairs for non-wheelchair users. So the wheelchair user is disabled by the system of stairs because it wasn't built for them, not by the fact they can't walk. Crip theory owes much to queer theory, taking its basis of flowiness and applying it to identities forged in sickness and unhealth. This includes disability, chronic illness, mental illness, and more. So I began my investigation into cripness and what this identity could offer me after being diagnosed with the chronic illness ME a few years ago. Since then, I've been in and out of hospital tests and appointments, including 2 24-hour tests for narcolepsy, and being diagnosed with 3 separate anxiety disorders by a psychiatrist. My health and its treatment fluctuates, which is the case for many with chronic illnesses. While I've been processing this, I've felt unable and also unwilling to separate it from my practice. And so I started to look for critical approaches to illness within an art context. I read Park MacArthur's text, Sort of Like a Hug, Notes on Collectivity, Conviviality and Care, and Joanna Hedver's essay, Sick Woman Theory, and I began to feel that there was already a framework and a community in place for me. I got in touch with the Canaries, who are a collective of people with autoimmune disorders and other chronic illnesses, and they're mostly all working in art in some way, who support each other through experience and knowledge sharing. And the group's co-founded by Jessie Cohen, Bonnie Swensionis, and also Carolyn Lazard, whose film Get Better Soon is in the studio in this exhibition. And her text, How to Be a Person in the Age of Autoimmunity, is in the zines. I became a member of the Canaries and joined the conversation, and I began to feel among my own. Most of this, though, was happening in the US, and I wanted this community near me. Brit Crips exists already, of course, and organisations like Shape Arts are doing really amazing things to combat ableism, and there's a really rich soil to build on here. The disability arts movement in the 80s and 90s led sustained cultural and political production and activity, helping push towards disability rights legislation in 1995. Work by Tony Heaton, Alison Lomas, Tanya Raab, and many more, and phrases and slogans like the Block Telethon protests Piss on Pity and Matt Fraser's Survival of the Shittest are still relevant today. Looking around me, though, I felt that my community of Crips, in my peer group and my generation, was already there, but just not quite formed. I wanted to connect all the people I'd spoken to individually here in the UK, who were thinking about this and living it, but not living it quite communally. I applied to Wising's open residency call with a project to found a network of art practitioners who identify as CRIP, disabled, or otherwise non-conforming to standard ideas of good health, using the basis of CRIP theory as a foundation for a community of people who exist outside a societally accepted idea of wellness. I proposed to invite 5 art practitioners who identify as sick, CRIP or disabled to join me at the farmhouse, just over there, here at Wising, to talk about and research and develop some practical changes we could make, as well as a critical language that feels right for us and our new community. The reorganisation of Wising's residency application structure to make it as open and free as possible for the applicants to define for themselves meant there was a feeling of flexibility that would work particularly well for a group of Crips. The group is writer Rebecca Bly, artist and writer Uma Breakdown, artist Eleanor Coleman, writer Alice Hattrick, and artist Lizzie Rose. Once I put everyone in touch recently, we found we had so much to say and share that we decided to meet up regularly in the lead up to the residency in October, because straight away the group already felt like an active thing. We've been meeting once a month with half the group together in real life and the other half online to catch up and talk about personal experiences, talk about a relevant text per month as a kind of reading group. And we've also just started looking at a relevant artwork per month as well. So we've begun our work. Just have a sip of water. Crips face many barriers to work, social life, day-to-day living, and political participation. For many of us who sometimes or often can't leave the house, or even the sofa or the bed, Joanna Hedver's sick woman theory that I mentioned before, which gave me one of those first revelatory moments on my crip position, offers a framework for rethinking this participation. In it, they reassess the Arendtian model of politics as any action that's performed in public from the perspective of someone who cannot get their body in the street. They describe a period of illness in 2014 when Black Lives Matter marches passed through their neighbourhood as they held up a sick fist in the air in solidarity. They write, "I started to think about what modes of protest are afforded to sick people. It seemed to me that many for whom Black Lives Matter is especially in service might not be able to be present for the marches because they were imprisoned by a job, the threat of being fired from their job if they marched, or literal incarceration, and of course the threat of violence and police brutality, but also because of illness or disability, or because they were caring for someone with an illness or disability. I thought of all the other invisible bodies with their fists up, tucked away and out of sight. They ask, how do you throw a brick through the window of a bank if you can't get out of bed? And they restate the feminist mantra, the personal is political, through the lens of cripness, going on to say, sick woman theory is an insistence that most modes of political protest are internalised, lived, embodied, suffering, and no doubt invisible. The most anti-capitalist protest is to care for another and to care for yourself, to take on the historically feminised and therefore invisible practice of nursing, nurturing, caring, to take seriously each other's vulnerability and fragility and precarity, and to support it, honour it, empower it, to protect each other, to enact and practice community, a radical kinship, an interdependent sociality, a politics of care. When we're here in October, we plan to spend time with all of us physically together, living in the same space and working out what our individual needs are for ourselves and from an arts organisation like Wising. Beginning a new community now as 6 of us, we plan to found and put in place a way of communicating with others in this position and for this network to expand. We'll invite some key people to the farmhouse to talk about the practicalities, politics and criticalities of sickness and cripness. People who have experience of accommodating specific needs of art workers and people who have found ways to work in the art world as sick crips. I think some of the things we'll be talking about will be crip time, so doing things slower in an obviously time-pressured social and work context, particularly in the art world. Asking for access for less visible or commonly understood needs, so alone time, having alone time and space, and needing to lie down have come up as really big ones in our discussion so far. So how can you nap in a gallery that you're working in, for example? Cure and anti-cure politics, and the temptation to keep invisible illness invisible for fear of discrimination and to read or come off as well for those who can. We will carry out a workshop to publicly talk about crip issues, to share some of what we're thinking about and to hear from other people. We plan to establish a consultancy for arts organisations to engage with in order to better accommodate the access needs of the artists, writers and other practitioners they work with, and find ways of professionally and clearly defining our own individual specific requirements when entering into working relationships. And importantly, we will spend time sleeping, napping, crashing and decompressing. Something Rebecca Bly said in our group email chain has really stuck with me. She said, "It's so nice to be able to say we, about something which is ongoing in my life and has been very solitary lately. I think this articulates the importance of bringing sickness and cripness out onto platforms like this one. Perhaps we can move from privately coping or not coping to being able to identify as collective, support each other, and find ways to engage in art and our work as crip and plural, rather than individually constantly trying to fit existing standards. I can't and don't want to separate my illness and cripness from my practice, because it forms the conditions and process I make my work in and through. Crip is a necessarily political position, and it is a necessarily collective position. Our cripness affects the ways we partake and don't partake in a wider socioeconomic structure, through the consumption of medication, through the withdrawal of labour, through our unattendance of events, and how many of us there are. We plan to keep talking and maybe writing towards building on what already exists to further develop a critical language around cripness and sickness. I want this language to become more familiar, and I want thinking from a crip position to become a habit for anyone thinking practically and critically about art. I'm thankful to Lotta and John and everyone at Wising for asking me to begin this conversation today ahead of the residency in October. And I hope this conversation can continue beyond the residency and expand outwards to all the crips in their sick beds. Thank you.
Phoebe Collings-James is a Jamaican-British artist born in London and living in New York. Her practice is intentionally messy and sprawling, focused on how we live with getting bodied. Her work takes form in drawing, videos, sculpture, text and music, with a distinctly corporeal approach. She burdens ubiquitous materials with a process of symbolic layering, all in order to explore emotional connections to the politics and erotics of violence, language and fear. On this current residency at Wising, with last year's interesting Negro / Jamila Johnson Small, Phoebe will create a collaborative work embodied through a symbiotic relationship between dance, music and sculpture, asking what an anti-assimilationist practice might look and sound like in 2018. Move out of your way.
Can you let me know when it's turned up? Yeah.
Panic, 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 panic.
Hi. Oh, that's quite close. So I guess I'm more nervous than I thought I was. So I'm going to speak a bit about the project that me and Jamila are working on. And we've been here for a few weeks already. So I guess we kind of have a bit of a sense of what we thought we were going to do and what's actually been happening and how those two things might differ a bit. So obviously John read my bio. So I guess my background comes more in the visual arts, the breadth of what that means. And Jamila is an artist whose background has been mainly in dance and performance, or through dance and performance. And so I guess where we come together is at a point of intention for our work, and also an old friendship of over 15 years now, and a combined intuition around the role of sound in our work and lives. The project we're doing at Wising is based around a title of Sounds for Survival, Sound as Weapon. And to start with, I'm going to share some of our initial propositions for this work. So our idea will be centred around a conceptual deconstruction of percussion as it functions instrumentally and also as a radical proposition to the various ways you could think about the power of striking an object. We will use the foundational logic of percussion to create our own instruments made of ceramics and other materials. They will be over and undersized, shifting in scale, tone, timbre, and they will be oddly shaped to create new boundaries for our bodies to navigate in the sensory labour of their being played. We will use the recording studio to work on our original music production. It will act as a supplementary soundtrack for the performance or as a composition to be recreated or responded to live with new instruments. At this early stage, we imagine that we will record sounds we create in workshop sessions with musicians. We will invite to engage with our ideas and the percussive sculptures we create, and in the first instance, to share their knowledge, passion for percussion, and also to document and study their different and specific gestures whilst playing. As research towards the construction and choreographic potential of our own instruments, all this alongside spoken word fragments of field recordings. We will consider our multidisciplinary genre disobedient practices as artists in the Black, British and Caribbean diaspora who use sound, sculpture and dance as primary modes in their work to create shifting images, intense atmospheres and different physical states. As artists, we create work that has an inherently disobedient intention, challenging binary perceptions of how Black people should behave and expectations put on Black bodies to perform a spectacle, asking what an anti-assimilationist practice might look like, requiring the audience to both engage emotionally and conceptually, not separating the embodied experience from the intellectual processing. Lukumi, voodoo and spiritual figures like Anansi are summoned in our work as traditions to both uphold and evolve with, while contemporary traditions in Western music and dance are challenged in powerful and sonic movement-based discourse. So I guess those were our original intentions. And in the last few weeks, we've been trying to work through these ideas. This involved a lot of late night chats in the farmhouse. It's interesting you talking about Leah talking about kind of like the time spent on these residencies and what they might look like. And definitely for Jamila and I, it was listening to our bodies, what we needed. Some of our most fruitful conversations were when Jamila was in the bath at 2 a.m. Sorry, Wilf. And yeah, I was sitting on the floor and we were working through things. And then some of the more focused moments were inviting people to come, other artists, to come and work with us. We did an open call and it was fairly open in terms of the disciplines the people could bring, and mainly it was about an engagement with our ideas. Yeah. So, as well as working with the ceramic instruments I had made that included bells, textured orbs, and a version of a triangle, microphones balanced so that we had to crouch, reach, or bend to sing through them, and a lot of dancing. This figure of Anansi that we'd been thinking about previously came through in kind of movements around the studio, trying to, I guess, embody the sort of idea and animal in the space. Something that also led from thinking about that was also thinking about this idea of a knowledge that is internal, which could also be like maybe a childhood knowledge or things that are learned through osmosis opposed to an institutional or book knowledge, even though books could be in the home, but like the different context books are in and what you get from them in the different contexts. This was through Jamila talking about the fact that Anansi came to her as a childhood story, you know, and so it was something that's been in different contexts in her life. And how, I guess, in terms of like not only anti-assimilation, but kind of like what I would describe as maybe getting over the trauma of going to art school, is thinking about like relocating and reprioritizing and privileging and valuing different knowledges that were maybe drummed into you that were not as important. And that's also something that seems to come up for lots of the other artists who were sort of somewhat differing in ages and moments when they've been in different institutions. Yeah. We spent a lot of time in the dark listening to dub, trying to locate the pressure it resonated in our bodies. That required a little imagination too, as we were working with no sub. But we concentrated on the micro movements of our bodies and worked sound into our bodies using a practice of organ breathing, which is kind of something we did laying on the floor. And I guess it's the kind of sound that you make when you're like, ah, and trying to like push that sound, find different ways of moving our mouths and opening our throats to see how far, see if you could actually imagine your kidneys and sing into the kidneys. And some people got further down than others. Jamila was like in her toes somewhere, but yeah. But it was an interesting process of both thinking about these ideas of both conceptually and physically. I think the word embodied is one that I feel like I probably use a lot, and maybe lots of other people do too, to describe how we ingest all of these ideas and pump them through us and then eventually make work. And so it was interesting to do that work that was actually very truly embodied. So we lay in the dark listening to a recording by artist Ryndon Johnson, who spoke about the skin as an organ and the hide being a skin without a body. Have I ever felt like a hide, a transformative switch between myself, my objects and subjects, the hide and the cloak? In between these more physical exercises, we did a lot of talking, and I'm now going to read some thoughts I had from these conversations. I need movement, I need to not know. Assimilation is formula. It is you asking a question and me having an answer that fits in neatly with the order of things, one that does not change. Is a person's practice the work? I'm thinking that there are potentials for the way we practice to be anti-assimilationist, but that the performance of the work will always involve some assimilation to the walls of the space it is held in, the conditions and demands of the people holding power, the dynamic of the audience and performer. Maybe it is best to consider anti-assimilation in the same way we do joy. I don't expect joy to be constant. It is a peak moment, felt in multitude of ways, like food pushing through a gut or something, getting absorbed by the intestinal membrane along the way. I guess in this sense, needs constant feeding, action. However, perhaps it is possible for anti-assimilation to reach a critical mass, chaos, chorus, osmosis. I can imagine the performers laying on the floor doing the organ exercises, then monologues, and then peeling away to interact with other stations of these kind of points that we, in some of the exercise, kind of set out. So there was like a microphone on a bench, sort of like kind of high up. There was these sort of ceramic bells and orbs in one section. There was the projector that Jamila put on this really horrible Emma Watson video, but anyone could come and turn it off, put something else on. We had sound recorders, just different things around the room. I had like a string of ball bearings that in my mind was a kind of like opened up cabasa or something, just let thread out. Yeah, I lost my chorus osmosis. I can imagine the performers laying down on the floor, Thinking of levels, perhaps we could build slim body-sized platforms at differing heights for people to be laying on. Colonisation and decolonisation is simply a question of relative strength, Fanon said in Wretched of the Earth. I feel the tension of this relation, but I don't want to believe it is the only way, because relative strength holds only death. Where can life grow from there, between the cracks? Unless it is about reconsidering strength, what strength could actually mean in this context. If it is not the strength of the gun, knife, rope that Fanon speaks of, then what could it be? I was left feeling tired but full from the workshop days. That did not feel like assimilation, but were it recorded, shared, translated into, it would have felt violent. So what is there? Privacy, opacity. We are from anywhere. We cannot go back. There is no back, and perhaps there is no future with us in this current flesh. What is there beyond holding or being filled with something else? Overflow, overwhelm, spilling, relative strength. So this is where we are at so far. We look forward to sharing more with you soon. Thank you.
Elijah is an electronic music producer and co-founder of the influential grime label Butters, which has been described by The Guardian as one of the genre's smartest operations. He and the core artists Flavor D, Swindle and Royalty, on the label he runs with his partner Skillian, have toured globally and have been a fixture across the club and festival circuit since 2010. He held a residency at London's Fabric from 2013 to 2016 and broadcasted weekly on the then pirate, now community station Rinse from 2008 to 2014. This has seen him collaborate with all of the top-tier artists in grime, such as Skepta, JME, Wiley, Kano and Stormzy. His work spans music programming, journalism, A&R and artist management, and shines a light on the artistic, social and economic challenges and opportunities for emerging artists. His podcast series Rhythm and Cash explored these issues head-on with MCs, producers and journalists, talking openly about how they make a living. And so as Associate Artistic Director at Lighthouse in Brighton, Elijah produces Last Dance, a series of talks, performances and online publications that take the debate on the road and into clubs and galleries and cities across the UK for a timely and urgent look at the rapidly changing landscape for artists and creative communities. Is that the timing? Are you ready?
Can I use this one?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
I just feel like an MC if I do it that way. I just like make me feel more comfortable. I'm not comfortable talking sitting down, weirdly enough. I don't have a script or anything. I just have like kind of images and then like my thoughts around it. So my background is in like music production and DJing. I spend a lot of time in clubs with like grime and garage and a lot of like London sounds. And I got to like travel around the world playing the music with people. Throughout that, I've kind of just had this blog on the side, just writing about different experiences I had with artists, and someone kind of picked up on one of the topics that I was writing about, just like artist sustainability, basically. And it's not like a topic in the music that I put out or in the work in general, or something that really comes up that much in grime in general, but it's something that is affecting like all of us day to day, and it's something that I talk about on Twitter all the time. And he invited me to Lighthouse in 2015, and I kind of did a talk about how like I make money, which is like kind of like an ugly topic in like arts organizations sometimes. And then I did it, and then it was one of those things where someone said, yeah, let's talk again, and I was like, yeah, cool, and I just left and I never thought about it. And then this fund from the Arts Council, which I didn't really know what it was at that time, came up, called Changemakers, and it was like looking at we'll get to that in a minute. Looking at a fund to support a cohort of black, minority, ethnic and disabled leaders to develop their leadership skills through an undertaking of a senior leadership training and development placement hosted by a national portfolio organisation or major partner museum. So at that time when I saw those 4 sentences, I didn't really know what that meant, even though I have been involved in like the arts in a broad sense for like 8-9 years since I left university. I've never had a job or anything. I've always done music. But the program was about giving us relevant experiences, skills, knowledge and confidence to be able to compete on merit when future artistic directors, chief executive or other senior leadership positions became available. So I thought, okay, like that's something maybe that I could do. And then I got told this. Only 10% of MPO managers are from BAME background. Again, an expression I hadn't really heard before in my work, because most of the people that do the kind of stuff that I do, like either look like me or brown, or like just not, or in this, what's the A for again? Is and damn, black. Oh, it's black and minority ethnic background. Is it black, Asian? It's black. It shifted. Is it? Oh my god. Yeah. So I was like confronted with all this like language that I wish I had your actual spread that whole time. You need to actually get that to every arts organization ASAP. Like have it on the wall, because it's when I was looking at all that, I was like, I've digested all this stuff in the last 12 months that I wasn't really thinking about just creating work. So if I saw that at the beginning, I would have been like, okay, like I would have been able to navigate a lot better and quicker than I actually did. So I was thinking, okay, could I be like an artistic director of the future? Yeah, I don't know. So this is the kind of view that of the world I had doing my work. So I'm usually in the DJ position. This is Skepta, and this is Fabric. And at the time when this bid was going through, Fabric closed. There was like a death in a club. 18-year-old overdosed and passed away. And the police said they're closing that space. And I thought, what happens if these kind of spaces that I've been working in, meeting people, creating work, keep closing? What can I do about it? Obviously, I'm not like a millionaire or anything, so I can't open my own space, and I probably will never be able to. And it made me think, like, my generation of artists, if we can never own space, especially I'm from London, like if we can never own our own buildings, like how can we control our art or be in charge of organizations? Like, will I have to like lead like ones that already exist, or I don't know, create small ones on WhatsApp or whatever people are doing these days? I don't know. So how I kind of did it in my work, the challenge of stepping into this organization, Lighthouse, which is based in Brighton. So I've jumped into another kind of city. I've never worked in an office or never worked with in an organization before. So I had to kind of adjust really quickly to that way of thinking, working in like 10 to 6 and then stopping, because like people have like families and stuff. I just like never stop. Like I don't, yeah, this has been good. This has been like a insight. Like, okay, yeah, it's actually good to actually have a like 8-hour day. That has been super weird. And like even the fact like someone wants me to be creative at like 10:30. It's like, okay, that's new. And like most of my time, my face has been like this. Like I was kind of thrust into this position of being like, yes, like a black artistic director, and the work isn't specifically about race or about I don't know, about race and about being black and like black power specifically. But I had like support from a lot of black elders that were like, you're in this position, like we're gonna amplify you and back you. I'm like, yeah, sick. Like I just happen to be black as well. I am black, definitely, but not all the work is to do with that. So I had all this kind of crazy support, but at the same time it made me like not kind of want to engage on certain levels, because I'm like, I care about a lot of like youth and like working class politics, all this kind of stuff, which sometimes when like I'm like this doesn't come across. And we'll move on. At the same time, I've been still DJing, so I've been seeing kind of, you know, culture change in front of me every week. I've been playing, I think I did 60 shows last year, on top of like being in this kind of office kind of environment. And I would tell people in the office like, oh, these are the things that happened when I was like away on the weekend, and trying to like incorporate what I was learning in music back into the arts and vice versa. Weird. That's just a cool picture. I was just where to put in there. So the topic, last dance, when I actually got to the organization, the person that brought me in and was like so supportive of like me as a person left straight away. So that was a bit of a hard thing to adjust to. And then the director of the organisation left a few months later. So I was like, oh, kind of feel like I'm in charge of myself now. I got like a great new director called Ali, and we kind of built up this program. And instead of like just trying to attack all these people that are kind of like taking our spaces and kind of affecting how new movements get started, I was like, let's just start it here at Lighthouse. Our riches isn't in money, it's in space. Like most of the time we have like a room empty, like letting people come in, like you lot are doing residencies here for like a month or something. We do residencies for a day or 2 days. And that's enough sometimes to get collectives in that can advance ideas really quickly. You know, that will take 2-3 days. Like when I was coming up, or like starting my label, me and my partner Skillian, we just used to work in like my bedroom, and it's not really like a possibility for everyone. I'll put that there. So I brought in other artists that I've been kind of working with on tour, and did kind of creative workshops like this. This is Flavor D, like one of the artists that's on our label, and kind of opened up like the format I usually have is them like having their laptop and then have them create work in front of people, and then as they go, let people ask questions. So that's been kind of like a cool way of that demystifying a lot of things that have been kind of kept secret about, you know, club music and the way we kind of form work. This is like kind of the audience generally is quite young, and an audience that organization didn't think they could reach. The language I got when I came in was like, oh, young people are at home on Xbox or on Netflix or like apathetic. They don't care about art, or they don't care about coming out. And I'm like, no, they're here. Like you have to like believe me that the people will want to come out if you put something on that interests them, and they do. Like every time we do stuff, it's like a room kind of this size, so you can only get like 60 people in there. It's always busy, and they've made program around knowing that they have this audience now. So maybe like 200-300 people that kind of on rotation come. That's completely changed their like audience of what it was before. Yeah. This was like a workshop we did, like an all-female production workshop. So we had people come in, and every one of these have Ableton Live making their first beat at Lighthouse, basically. And instead of like complaining about all these kind of like politics in clubs, I'm like, if we arm everyone with the tools to just make their own networks and clubs and music ultimately, and control and own their own work, like that's going to influence the scene more than, I don't know, talking, or I don't know. When I've been in kind of art settings and a lot of diversity conversations, we talk so much, but we kind of like, we never get to like a resolution. In this situation, I felt like if I could make, I don't know, it's like say 10 new producers and people that kind of think similarly, don't even know each other, exist in this kind of small place called Brighton, this could be the future of clubbing. I've made films with friends over time, and this is just a couple shots from what I've been making. So this is at a new place called 5 Miles in Seven Sisters. Can't really see that. Can you see that? Let me try and increase the brightness. Does that make any difference? Nope. Describe it. Okay, so this is at a party called Opulence, a queer party. You know it? Okay, yeah. How do I describe it? They describe themselves like a queer techno party in London, like kind of like dress to impress vibe. And that was last Friday. And again, it's like arming people with ideas instead of saying, okay, these things are bad. Like, fuck it, let's just arm new people. Sorry. I nearly got to 15 minutes. Sorry. I feel like my position of like power, so to speak, has been like being able to arm new people with the tools and resources and money, most importantly, to create what they think is like a utopian vision of clubbing, rather than me deciding that from top down, or promoters and things that already exist, like trying to change them. I'm just like, let them do their thing. Like, let's use Lighthouse and use me and people around us to build up new talent and ideas that haven't even done before yet. This is at CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider. So again, like in between that, you know, being like behind the desk, organizing things, I'm kind of making work as well. And this is with an artist called Haroon Mirza. And we're doing like a kind of installation / gig at Brighton Festival, and kind of mixing some of his theory around what kind of music culture will be like in the future, but at the same time, you know, connected it with science. I don't want to go into it too much, otherwise I'm going to lose myself. But it was like a really unique situation I wouldn't have been able to get just by, I don't know, mixing like grime records or making music. But like connecting art, music, science sometimes might just come up with like these random situations. There's not really like a grand point behind it. So the future for me, like the placement with the Arts Council Changemaker thing was for 18 months and I finish next month. So now I'm like kind of in the middle. I'm like, what do I do? Do I continue like being a music person or like trying to be an arts professional? Yeah, I don't really know. But like, I think like the perfect sweet spot for me is like being somewhere in the middle where I can still kind of do my practice as like an artist, tour, meet new people, and then bring those ideas to art and bring those and then let, you know, the budgets that I get access to be used by people that have never been in this kind of setting before. Do you know what I'm saying? Because that was me in 2016, because I didn't know what the Arts Council was, so that's how out of it I was. Do you know what I mean? And that was only literally December 2016, so I'm brand new. But yeah, that's it.
So it's like, thank you, everyone. I mean, it's really worth saying that it's hard enough at any point to talk about your practice and put things into words, but especially it's hard to talk about things before they've taken place. Is that better? Oh. We can get a reverb. Is that? Should we take this one out of the equation? See what happens. Is that better?
No, it's because you're too close to the speaker. I point the mic that way because it should be right.
Okay.
Yes, because
Could you twist that? We'll get it.
How's this? Is that better? Okay, we'll just begin. So yeah, no, it's worth reiterating that it's hard enough to talk about your work at any moment, but particularly before it's happened, and probably the most hard is when it's in process, when you're trying to figure out ideas and processes. So thank you everyone for just trying to figure that out publicly. It's a very hard thing to do. And I got quite a hard job in terms of thinking on my feet about how to kind of connect some of those things, and also to think about it in relation to the context of the show. One of the things that I think for me was so striking listening to all of you talk was just this very basic kind of condition of collaboration in your work, and the condition of whether it's through the interviews, through the open call, like collaboration seemed to be essential to the way you were trying to work through certain ideas. So I suppose I want to start with a very basic question to each of you: is like, how did you arrive at collaboration? Has that been something that has always been a necessary condition, or is it something that you found through a kind of lack in your limitations as an artist or a thinker, or whatever that may be? Like, what is it about the collaboration that allows you to work in a different way? Who's going to begin?
So is this working?
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah? Oh, yeah. It was you.
The MC causing problems with the mic. It's like
I think for me, so I've led groups in the past on a long-term basis and a shorter-term basis. I led a group called the Empath Group for nearly 3 years. And then, short-term things like workshops and stuff. So a lot of my work is based in collaborative processes anyway. But particularly for this project, I guess it's this thing of me trying to work out just quite simply where my community is. And, I've spoken to so many people individually and privately who seem to be thinking the same things as me, experiencing the same personal day-to-day things as me, working in the art world alongside me, next to me, and we're just talking about it like on these one-on-one things. And I think for us it's been, it's just spoken so much to how important that is, in that the second I put everyone in touch, we were like, right, yeah, so we're going to meet every month, right? I don't think anybody even put it forward. It was just, we all just assumed it because it is so necessary for us. So yeah, for me, it's just that's a large part of the content. It's not just the form. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a lot of my practice is me being on my own, and I enjoy that mostly. But actually, I guess in terms of collaboration, I guess a lot of it's about like how do you let things out? How do you kind of like let things out and let things grow and hold each other's ideas and fears and the situations that come up through the work. And you, Leah said that was talking about care being anti-capitalist, and I can't help but think of like care and friendship, and like, you know, like Elijah and I and Jamila have known each other for many, many years from school. You guys talking about where you met and the conditions, and how, as much, I guess, as artists, as friendships grow, that those kind of bonds are also important, to have these kind of like artistic friendships, to give you a solid base for any kind of material work, really.
Yeah, I guess I work individually as an artist, and I also work with the collective creativity that I'm a part of. And then I've worked in various forms collectively, and I guess for me it's also just kind of the conditions, like as a queer trans artist of colour, the community, the pool is quite small, and so often we're having to be in competition with each other for work even, and opportunities. So we're kind of forced into having to be in some form of community, whether that's supportive, you know, how we choose to kind of use that situation. And I think that's kind of where a lot of it has been born from. It's like, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the fact that we have to go for the same position. What does that mean? What does that do to our friendships and our community? And then I guess it's just coming from, I don't know, maybe it's just a cultural background of always being socialised in community, and that being something that I'm just familiar with and used to, and that's that in that way. But in terms of working collectively, I think for me it's provided a space that we can hold each other, like this holding space, this network, and something to what you just said about, you know, sharing resources and sharing that kind of knowledge. But I think there are you know, there are tensions, and this is when I come back to the kitchen table conversation. There's a lot. I've been in a lot of activist spaces where we've had to be sat at the table with each other and we haven't agreed. But I think that's a really productive kind of tension. So for me, collectivity is kind of many different things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the most basic form, like the first kind of like collaborative things I would have done is pirate radio, and I would have shared a show with like another DJ, so you don't have to buy all the same records, and because you can't afford to buy everything. This was like when people bought music, and then like the collaborative performances, like the picture I showed with Skepta and things like that. I'm used to playing with maybe like one other DJ and then other MCs and all that kind of stuff, and it's not possible for me to do anything without, you know, the one or the other. And then, you know, the promoters of the music that I do are usually artists too, so you have this kind of thing where like, yeah, and I've become that too. I've put on shows and then DJ'd at my own show, and then, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm like getting the artists in, and they're like, oh, it's like 5 minutes to my set, and then I've got to play. And then like the things, the boundaries between each practice isn't as defined. So I guess that it's like everyone here today has been like, we're like interdisciplinary, and like, yeah, that's like everyone. Everyone is kind of like that. Everyone is like, I rarely meet anyone these days that works in like one art form, and like the most art forms you need someone else to do something.
I mean, I think it's really interesting actually within the context of Wising, because I mean, I imagine you know, conventionally the artist residency is the place where the single artist comes and they think and they produce the work, and that's, you know, that's the form of the residency. I mean, you were talking, John, about the fact that the submission process has changed. I imagine, you know, being able to, as Raju, you talked about, I think a certain like institutional practice at a certain moment, like how somewhere like Wising can accommodate collaborative ways of working and accommodate polyphony. You know, I mean, it's all very well to say, okay, polyphony is our theme, we're going to deal with polyphony, but like, how does that work in real terms of like practice of people coming here, of being hospitable? You know, it's a whole different way of working institutionally as well as personally for all the artists.
Yeah, I mean, we've really been rethinking what artists need when it comes to residencies, and there are kind of various things going on, various things at play. There's I say generally maybe a shrinking of the studio, so maybe with the exception of Phoebe and Jamila, who've been kind of making objects. A lot of artists come for the residencies and really just need like desk space to work. But so that's kind of happening. But then at the same time, there are a lot of collaborations which are kind of separated geographically. So rather than having kind of 2 or 3 people who can meet up in the same city, which kind of, as Raju's made clear in their work, is something that's becoming more difficult by itself, you're also having this new problem that's kind of enabled or created by ease of communication, where collaborations exist kind of like nationwide or kind of across kind of seas and continents, and that's something we've been kind of very keen to support, to just give space for groups to come together.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I'm driving at, and something that also came across in all of your presentations was, Leah, was it you who brought up the personal is the political mantra? So this kind of absolutely necessary blurring of one's actual conditions of life, of how we work, who we speak to, on what terms, and then the work gets produced. I mean, Raju, you talked about it when you did this residency, as actually using that moment to figure out, okay, where the hell, like, what are all the bits that are going, and the fact that no longer could one just present work about something, rather it needs to be like, we need to understand it as who we are, the practice that gets produced and the practice gets made. So I suppose if I could kind of veer towards a question, I guess it would be like within art world spaces, whether that's residencies, galleries, institutions, very formalized ways of working. Like, what are the mechanisms that one can use to like bring that very real personal situation into that? Like, how can we find ways to sort of break those open? Or like, I mean, are you finding that institutions like Wising, I know you're also involved in the showroom, for example, are they becoming more accommodating? Is it a question of like, where are we with that? Like,
how long have you got? I think that's the problem. You know, that is the problem for me, and I guess that's why I wanted to focus on kind of informal knowledges and informal ways and processes of producing knowledge, because I even feel like even when institutions get me in, knowing that that's my practice and that's how I work and this is my background and that's what they're attracted to, they still, there is this other sense of assimilation, to like assimilate into their way of doing things, so structure, or how can we change their structure by doing things our way, but they're not allowing that to take place. So I think that for me is this ongoing struggle, and I think that comes down to funding and how they're managing to finance what's happening in those institutions. That doesn't allow them to then, they're bound by that funding, and I think that's the difference between self-organizing and institutions, is that, you know, when you're self-organizing, you make your own rules up. So for me, it's been a challenge. But what was your question exactly? How do you bring that in? I mean,
is it a fight worth having? Or, I mean, you talked about Phoebe. You talked about like anti-assimilation. You know, we can also talk about kind of separationist tendencies. There's a whole area of theory around separationists. Like, is it better to be separate actually? Whether that's as women, in questions of gender, question of color, or like, how do you? Is it better to assimilate or anti-assimilate? Like, where's the fight in terms of institutions?
I don't know. I guess people who haven't historically been given any space, or even been able to take space easily, have always found a way of operating within these systems. To give an example of my experience at Wising, I became at home in the farmhouse. I became at home in the places that I was able to take over. In those places, I did what I wanted. In terms of interactions with all the staff here, like, there are moments when the conversations are in a car or like something like that, and we're two people in a car. There are times when the conversations are in a building and those parameters shift. So I don't know if you can think about it so absolutist in a sense, but more talking to each other about how we find ways of dealing with those boundaries so that we don't like get hurt more, I guess, you know, and you know, Elijah was talking about Raju's map and things like that. It's just like, if I'd seen that, I wouldn't have had my heart broken so many times. Do you know what I mean? Like, or more than that. Yeah, you come, but yeah, so like maybe it's not just like what will the building look like? Maybe it will just look like this, you know? But like, how do we work inside the building or something? I don't know.
And maybe Elijah, having like been involved in this process with the Arts Council, maybe you want to add in something in terms of a very kind of formalised process that you're part of, but you spoke about it very positively.
Because this scheme is called Changemakers. The resistance to change have like a kind of license to just say, oh, let's do this, and people not say no for this 18 months. And in the organisation, I've got like a limited time of being able to do it, and I've been able to push buttons and just pass, like in Graham, pass the mic to someone else in the situation. So a lot of the time at Lighthouse, I'll invite people in that are not like speakers to speak, or not whatever, used to leading workshops to lead workshops, and then that changes the dialogue in the room, and they just get to listen to it, rather than there being like a formal consultation process of who is allowed to speak or who is, you know, an artist or something. Like, I feel like one thing that was good for me is like what I did for a long time I wasn't being called an artist, and it just allowed all this kind of freedom. I wasn't like being called like a visual artist or a DJ or something like that. It wasn't any formality of my actual role. So it just allowed like, okay, you can just listen to this person, this person. I'm not like bound by any rules myself. So I can actually preach that. I'm like, I've got this far without having this, I don't listen to these people because they're not directors, or they're not they haven't shown at a gallery before, because I didn't know what those spaces were. All I can do is just judge on what I like and what I think is good, and which is kind of what we should be doing, right? So maybe, I don't know.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit, actually, to think about the exhibition in a certain way. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the kind of the inadequacy of the exhibition. Not this exhibition, exhibitions in general, like the inadequacy of the exhibition format. You know, this moment where you have to crystallize things. When the opening comes, you can't change it anymore. That's the statement that you're making, either as a curator or as an artist or an institution. And the fact that it is bound by certain formats, images, objects, texts. I think listening to everyone speak today kind of reinforced that view, that the certain inadequacy of the exhibition format to mediate the types of practices that you're all engaged with, and I think that artists are increasingly engaged with, collaborative, research, discursive, kitchen table based practices. So I suppose to lead this all to a question would be, where do you stand on the types of formats that you're being asked to make work in and through, and are those adequate, sufficient? Elijah, you talked about the kind of luxury of to say, okay, I'm not this person, I can work in all these different ways, but that's not always the case. So I suppose I want to ask a little bit about the formats in which you're being asked to make work, and even if you could like reflect on certain things, reflect on certain moments where that could have worked or didn't work.
I guess in terms of what is asked of you, I don't know if much like changes that much in terms of like a gallery situation or like an art institution situation, but I think in terms of ways in which it's possible for us to redefine like what we want a show to look like, I feel like there's like a lot more possibility. Even thinking about kind of like, I don't know, an idea of like time being racist and time being sexist or ableist, and like, I mean, things in my practice, like if ever I make something, it can always change unless it's literally not in my hands anymore. If someone buys a video, it's always still available online. Like I see like that kind of thing as patronage and support. I don't see it as like ownership necessarily, even if they have like a USB or something like that. I like when things like keep moving. So like in Jamila's practice, in lots of her performances, she'll ask different people to collaborate on music. There have been times when like I've asked Elijah to do a reading of a poem that Jamila has sent me to make her something. Then I find out Jamila's showing like a new work with the music all messed up by someone else, and you know, like these things us being open to new possibilities, also like new ways of working. Like I worked in clubs for years and was always too shy to make music. Had I been involved in something like what Elijah's doing, I would have been really on it. But so I think that like just keeping things moving, like trying to provide the literal conditions for people to like, you know, fulfill their wildest imagination. And also like, maybe this relates to you talking about like not just being black or however you described it, but like what do we actually want to make? Like what colour is it? What shape is it? Does it have a shape? Like, you know, like all the amazing things that we could possibly like create for someone to experience, like what is that actually going to be, rather than, as well as thinking about anti-assimilation and the activism that it holds as well. That's what I was thinking. Sorry. I don't want to hog it.
Yeah, I guess for me it's like, like Elijah was saying, everyone's interdisciplinary. I think for me, what the work I make, the form it takes depends on what it's about. Like I just made a VR game, which is the thing that's behind the front desk. I haven't done that before. Which, you know, a lot of that's to do with access, so it's downloadable as an app, so anyone in the world can have it as long as you've got a phone. And then, yeah, and I think, like Phoebe was saying, my work sometimes can be something that's, you know, ever-changing. Like when I was leading the empath group, a lot of people were asking me, so then are you going to make work with it? And it's like, no, that is the work. We meet once a month, that's the work. And I was really, really influenced actually by a group of artists called Grupa Spomenik, which is Serbian for memorial group. So they're a group of people, artists and academics and writers, all from countries in the former Yugoslavia, who decided, in response to a call from the city of Belgrade, to like a really rare moment where they called for a memorial for the war that broke down Yugoslavia. They proposed, we will be the memorial, and we will meet as a group to discuss genocide regularly. And of course it wasn't accepted because they wanted a sculpture, because then it's over and done with and you can just be like, yep, don't have to feel guilty. It's there. We put, you know, however much money into this. But they decided to make the work anyway, so they meet and they talk about genocide and they accept that's something you can never ever understand, but the attempt at it is worth it. And I think for me that's massively influenced my practice, that way of thinking. Like, I don't want to come to conclusions. I don't want to make decisions between things necessarily. But the attempt at it is definitely worth it, and the talking about it and the process of it. Having said that, I think sometimes it can actually be really good and really satisfying to make something that is finished. I just finished making a film work, and it's like, it's there. And actually I don't have to put any more labour into it because it's done. Because sometimes you do end up putting all your energy into these things that are really important to you. But then, yeah, I guess particularly from my position being ill, I just can't do it all the time. And sometimes I do need to reassess, like, how much energy do I have for this? But,
yeah, I guess I come to arts practice in a slightly maybe different route, or because like I said, I was self-organising, so a lot of the time we had the capacity to do whatever we wanted to do and have that freedom to make whatever we wanted to make. When that kind of, those spaces started to shut down and I started to come more and more into institutional spaces, there has been this resistance. So, why am I being asked to like put something in a room? And I think I've never really worked like that, and I've worked in performance, so that is a different form as well that allows you to kind of interrupt and disturb those kind of logics. But then kind of moving away from that now, it's interesting because, yeah, when John asked me to submit what I was working on, I was like, it's just a work in progress. It's a work in progress. It's not ready. It's not right, you know. So, and then hearing this feedback about the tablecloth as well, like, yeah, this thing of making something, like, I'm glad I did it now, even though at the time I was like, I'm just going to put something that's a work in progress. But yeah, this question, I think, is about what is the work? And for me, it's like, often it's the process and not the tangible kind of outcome of it. And I don't always like to document everything that I'm doing either.
I think one of the word that I keep coming back to is practice, which I think kind of is so important to think about now. The practice that all of you are doing, and also the institution's doing, like that's the work. Like the as I say, the kind of choices that are made, the people that you're talking to, the processes you're going to, the practice is the work, and it's not that you know. Stuart Hall has this wonderful phrase where he talks about moments of arbitrary closure, where things are like presented, and that would be like the exhibition format, right? Where you have this moment of arbitrary closure, and then it opens up and it reforms and it goes in something completely different. But the practice, the reading, the writing, the talking, that's where the work is. That's where the work's situated. So
I'd say also that there's like possibility, which I get the impression of like is what the sort of like ideas were behind the new sort of style of residencies at Wising, is that like an institution could have a practice, right? That is possible for so that rather than coming together and you're like there's a rock and you're like all like it's like you're both a bit like that, you know, you're both been actually trying to do work, and where that sits together, like, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you want to add something to that, John? Or as the institution?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with regard to the idea of exhibitions being like a limited form, or what was the phrase used? Exhibitions as the inadequacy of exhibitions. I mean, I'd say that kind of as an institution, there's certainly we have a practice, or there is a way we try to do things, and you end up with a very unconventional program, and then with an exhibition like this, it's an opportunity to kind of present 12 months of a very unconventional program in a very conventional form, and that you know, there are opportunities in there. There are things you can do that are interesting. It's great that you can revisit conversations, or you know, kind of bring something from February into conversation with something from November, but there are obviously kind of limitations, and it's you know, in this exhibition there are lots of references to things that have happened, and that will have different meanings depending on whether you experienced it or not. And it can be a bit like looking at a group photograph and saying like, oh, here's Women's Beat League, they did this amazing retreat that was just for eight people, and you can kind of talk about it, and you can kind of talk about what came from that, and it's but there is a limitation, and it's kind of and just one other thought is that kind of in a sort of a very standard kind of art kind of structure or art career, exhibitions are kind of always seen as the prize, and while practices get more varied, more interdisciplinary, I think it's really important to remember that you know, there might be a trap in that those practices could just end up being left in kind of education programs or performance programs, and that you know, I think it's important to, you know, if the exhibition format doesn't work for you, then it can be changed, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm an exhibition curator, so don't get me wrong, I love exhibitions, and I love the finished thing. You know, I love that moment where you can step back and say that's done. You know, that's it, tick the box. But yeah, I think it's also incredibly apparent that we need to constantly challenge it, reinvent it, rethink it, rework it, all these sorts of things. Yeah.
Because I forgot to mention the exhibition at the showroom at the moment kind of tries to disturb that logic of the exhibition space, and so there's a schedule to the show and different things happen. I don't want to give it away, but people should go and check that out. It's called it's something about the conversation. Oh, I've forgotten the title now. It's terrible. There's something in the conversation that's more interesting than the finality of a title. Yeah, long one.
You talk about exhibitions, like how musicians talk about albums, And it's like, there's a benefit to doing albums and putting them out and doing a traditional kind of touring cycle, and in between that there's all these other kind of exciting things that happen. So sometimes you like a person's record, like Solange or something, but then in between she just did some like massive like installation thing that looks like really interesting. And that's like, for me, like I might interact with the album once, like going to an exhibition, but then the installation is the thing that blows your head off. Do you know what I mean? Or the things that you do in between to get to the album. Do you know what I'm saying? I think like if we as artists, whatever, are looking at exhibitions like that, it's like, okay, we still do them, like if you need to, and then everything else in between is kind of like maybe where the party's happening. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's taking that idea of polyphony also in terms of the formats, right, and the registers that things happen. So they happen at these very different registers, whether it's the album, the live performance, the exhibition, the kitchen table conversation. It's that type of polyphony as well in terms of the actual voices that are speaking.
You know what? It's like when I look at artists' websites and I see like their work, and it'll be like by the year, I'm like, oh man, how do I even list the things that I've done? In the same way, I feel like kind of like imposter syndrome. I do the same like amount of work probably, but then I can't list it in the same way because it's like not next to an organization or something. It's like if you did a show like underneath a Chinese restaurant and then I put like a year next to it, it doesn't really look legit in the same way that, you know, if it's at Wising and it's happening, and do you know what I mean?
Rasheed Araeen had this, like, I was doing this book where I was trying to inventorize a lot of his work, and you come across, I'd say, Rasheed, what's the date of this? And he was like, well, it's 1975 to 2015. I'm like, what? He's like, well, I first had the idea in 1971. Like, I collected some of the material. I didn't think to do anything with 1975, and then I revisited it in 2013, and it's that kind of thing. But it makes you realize how absurd like giving a date to a piece of art is, because of course it's like its genealogy goes back so many different ways and places. Maybe there's some questions or comments.
I didn't actually have a question to the last thing about space and the work and stuff. And I guess like I'm a dancer, trained in dance. I went to dance school, and I've ended up working in a lot of visual art spaces. And so how my work exists in the space is really informed by the space. And as much as I hear a lot of talk about how spaces can change and ideas can change, one of the constant conversations I'm having with dancers and performers, like me and Jamila talk about it all the time, is how these spaces cannot hold our work. And it really does change the work. Like I believe part of, definitely not all, but part of the reason that I started making moving images and film was to also manage that and want to have conversations or want to be part of these conversations. But actually, if my work's down the theatre and only a certain type of person comes, or I put it in a rave where like I've also practiced and a lot of my work comes from, then I don't get access to this type of conversation and this type of money. So I guess like when you're thinking about, you know, I guess it's a comment and a question, but it's like how does the space change enough to disrupt the hierarchy of art? And I think I really resonate with a lot of what you're saying, because I've always felt like bodies really struggle with that and sound really struggle with that. Like institutions are so interested in a lot of what they might call like London music or black sonic art or grime, but they don't have the sound systems to hold it. They just cannot produce the sound, and they don't invest in the same level of rigor that they put in installing a physical piece of work. And I feel that way about how my body is placed in the spaces. I'd be interested what people think about that. It is a question.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I need to think about that for a moment. But does anyone else have a comment for the?
That's what your comment is. What's keeping me like from not making more and like trying to, like I say, like trying to stay in the arts profession, because I understand those things and I want people like you in the space doing things. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm kind of torn because I've seen so much of this world and I want to just do my own thing. But at the same time, if I just leave it and just focus on myself, then there's all this opportunity that I can't, like, give to you. I'm kind of like, oh shit. You said that as well, and I'm like, oh, we should try and work on something, or you know what I mean? That, and I'm not even in a like, well, I guess beyond May, I won't even have a job anymore. So yeah, I didn't have one before, but now, and I know a lot more stuff, but I don't have a space. That's been the issue. But I think hopefully, like with, you know, maybe you as well, Phoebe, like everyone that understands these kind of things, like need to find yourselves in positions where you commission as well as make. I know that might be a pain in the ass for you, but like splitting some of your time away from your practice and
Or is it your practice?
oh yeah, or yes, or making that as part of your practice, like in Graham they always say, oh, who did you bring through? Like I like this person because he all these artists came from him, or like I like this radio station because all these artists came from there, like, and that bit being like quite a, like the reason I'm here is because, you know, 3 or 4 artists that I work with became successful later on as well. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, I did something and then like I used part of my money to spend whatever £1,000 getting someone else's record out, and just hopefully that happening in the arts, like artists taking that on in institutions. That might be going on a bit, but at people that understand the culture and stuff, actually, yeah, taking up, like applying for jobs and shit, man. I think it's really important. Maybe not me, but like someone else.
I mean, I guess this applies slightly less to your question and thoughts as to what you were saying, but like when we had the open call, we purposely didn't look at people's CVs. Like, I guess Jamila and I are probably quite similar, but like we just opened up the email, got a vibe, maybe checked their link to the website, got a vibe, and just went that way, you know. Mainly it was like there were no's because people were like not that I don't know, not connecting. But like there was one person in particular who was just like just so wanted to come and just had all the enthusiasm. It was like, okay, like that's enough. I mean, obviously not all processes can be like that, but maybe the processes can contain some of that standpoint and energy of like openness to like, this person wants to be here, so come, you know.
Yeah, I think I'd. Is this still working? Yeah. I think I'd probably have a bit more of a literal take on what you were saying in terms of bodies in spaces. Like I was saying in my talk, like if you can't get out of bed, which I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just thinking about it a lot at the moment and thinking of other ways around it. Like I've decided I'm going to get people to FaceTime me into private views when I'm too ill to get out of the house, because I think in the art world as well there is just so much pressure to be seen, and if you're in these positions where it is harder to be seen, or in my case literally can't be physically present in the space, then you feel like you're losing out professionally as well as the experience of it and just wanting to the basicness of seeing the stuff. So yeah, I don't know, it's on my mind. Yeah.
I'm trying to keep it short, though. No, I totally agree with you, and I think I'm constantly thinking about how we're constantly changing and whether we're losing integrity with the work that we're making by having to shift to certain spaces. And I'm kind of, I guess, interested in us building different infrastructure for us to show work that actually works for us, and so we don't have to compromise, because I think, yeah, that we shouldn't have to compromise on our work. Yeah.
If clubs and art programs, then like would be able to, right?
Yeah, I also think like if people just change floors, one of the main issues of galleries is concrete floors, and it actually causes so much injury. So it's interesting because like then I can't work and I'm in pain. So it's not just like it's like it does then start to move forward.
I had my knee strapped up the whole time Jamila and I were working on stuff on the concrete floor.
It's a big issue. Changes the work. Like I'm not jumping on this.
I guess I feel like it's kind of galleries have become, or like the art world or art institutions is kind of, it feels kind of relatively new that there's like things like performance, like when I was studying my BA at Goldsmiths 15 years ago, like was so uncool, like nobody was, like if people were doing it, it was like anything about the body, performance, it was just not done. And I think it's sort of relatively new that it, I think that it's, that these spaces are kind of accommodating this kind of work. And like we keep talking about interdisciplinary kind of practices, and there isn't that many other places that accommodate that in the same kind of way, I guess, and or allow space to sort of experiment with like sound or movement, or but I guess maybe places are playing catch up or something. And there's, I've often found I've had to compromise sort of sound as well with the concrete floors, or like, and it's really frustrating, but yeah, I don't know.
I think it's totally, thank God the institutions or spaces are playing catch up rather than the other way round, right? that they're having to hopefully adapt because of the practice that's being made and the ideas that are being generated rather than the other way around, because that would be a horrible situation. Did you want to add something, John, or do we...
just quickly, the kind of, while institutions can try and play catch up and can try and be kind of informed by artists and led by artists as much as possible, it still makes sense for them to sort of play to their strengths in a way. So that's why with Wising's location, it might not make sense to have a, say, like a weekly events program that was kind of showcasing the music that we're really interested in, because they might be challenges of bringing in an audience that would or creating a context where a DJ set would make sense. But that is something that we can do through a music festival, and so, or there are kind of other things we could do, which is kind of facilitating conversations, or kind of like asking Women's Beat League to lead a retreat that kind of that was similar to the image that Elijah showed us. So their project was to kind of offer kind of lessons on CDJs for a week for 8 women and non-binary people, and that's kind of something we can do using the space that we have. So while it's kind of, we would always kind of want to adapt, it's still sort of, there are things that we're better at and other places would be better at.
I sort of just want to thank everyone. It's been, again, one of these moments where so many things have kind of resonated, but just I think particularly acknowledging actually I think the advancement within people's practice. So I think a lot of the things, Elijah, you were saying about the need for things to kind of change, I think you're already kind of embodying through the way that you're creating structures, through these kind of collaborative structures. And it struck me, one of the underlying things that's very important about, I think, the way that, I don't know whether that's a generational shift or not, or whether maybe that's about connecting generations, but there is certainly this idea of kind of knowledge production, and that came up, and that sense in which I think people are sort of challenging orthodoxies, historical archives, institutional structures through new knowledge production, or by reconfiguring or recalibrating existing centres of knowledge, and then also these forms of kind of knowledge distribution and dissemination. So finding new pathways of kind of connecting to kind of audiences, and I think it's just important that we recognise that you're doing that already, despite the inadequacies of existing institutional structures. And for me, there's really something interesting about Raju. You know, you working in and out of these things.
Yes.
That feels a really important strategy.
Yeah.
That you're not completely subsumed within.
It's necessary for survival and healing as well. Yeah.
But working both, I think, as a kind of strategy, feels also really important and really vital. And I think I just did, lastly, so it's just a lot of comments, not questions really, but for me, there's a really interesting thing about a kind of intergenerational connection. Personally, I think as someone in their 40s, I feel like I've been in the middle, because I was taught by people like Sutaba Biswas and Keith Piper and Sonia Boyce and that sort of previous generation. Again, I had that, this came up a lot of the time, this about an absence of kind of being connected to practices or looking for practices that reflected one's own interests or identities. And again, as someone that's now teaching, that's still going on, I think. But it feels to me that there is this now a beginning kind of connection, I think, that's coming from maybe younger generation actively seeking out these previous histories. And I think that's also a really important thing, because that's often how institutional power works, through canonical structures. So that sense in which there is this history of practice that not validates, but that creates that, you know, my work isn't just operating in a kind of vacuum. And I think that's really, really important moving forward, is that I think emerging younger artists recognise that they are part of, you're not just working in isolation. Despite the inadequacies of someone that works in an art school, we're still in that place where, you know, I'm encountering people that are saying, where are my peers, you know? But anyway, I just felt that was something that I think that has perhaps shifted, is that I think people are coming from this place where they feel they are increasingly more connected, and there are these histories that they're linked to. Sorry.
You know, I really agree, and the Canaries that you were talking about, specifically the Canaries project, when I first encountered that 2 years ago now, it completely changed my life. And I wasn't even at that point experiencing any of the same things that, as directly in terms of my health, that Carolyn and others were talking about. But it completely shifted the way I was thinking, and that was through, I think, initially finding a text that they'd produced, and I live in New York, so they had been doing a residency at Recess. Because of the structure of Recess, which is a project space, I think it's called, in New York, where the space is given to a new group every month. And in terms of the form and structure of that, it's like it's open for the people to do whatever they need to do in there. It can be open to the public, or it could be not open to the public. It's like amorphous or whatever. Yeah, and the fact that can then get to me and to you, and to even more maybe directly help you. But yeah, those are some of the good things.
Anyone else want to add in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't want to turn it into the debate that we've all heard and had about, is social media good or bad? But there was another, let's not, but please. But there was a really interesting article in The Guardian, I think about a week ago, that was called Why Disabled People Can't #delete Facebook, and it's because actually that's how a lot of people rely on reaching their communities. Yeah, and I was also just going to add that, like you were saying, the thing of where are my peers, and that's what I'm doing. I'm going, where are my peers? Actually, they're all around. I don't really even need to look. All I'm trying to do is remove the moment where us in our ill health are subsidising institutions' lack of access with the energy that we don't have and the health that we don't have. So going to do an event or a private view or something that will knock you out for the next week or so, that's just subsidising, and you're paying the price at the end of that. So I suppose, and then you're kind of like pretending, trying to come off as well, because if you don't, you fear that you won't be employed as an artist or art worker or in any employment actually. So, but yeah, just kind of looking around me and going, okay, so we're doing this, let's not. And then when you take that away, if people feel able to, then there's so many of us there. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Harold. And also, I think to make that link that it's really, that's come about from collectivity and having support networks and kind of making demands and taking up space and having entitlement and also politics of refusal to say, no, I'm not going to work under these conditions, you know, and I think that's important as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm really inspired by younger generations. I'm teaching at UAL now, and there's a lot happening around decolonizing the curriculum and students just putting petitions out and demanding for staff of colour, and you know, so I think, you know, that groundwork has been done over the years, and you know, we do see the changes and we don't see the changes, and it's both, right? And everything's happening at the same time.
Are there any last questions or comments? John, do you want to any last comments or thoughts, or you?
No, not for me. Rather just thanks to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to maybe end on that point, that this kind of, I think what you see in the show and what we've seen today now is this very, very complex negotiation between historical precedents, groundworks, examples, and very real negotiations of practice and working methodologies and all these sorts of things. And it's a really, really complex, a complex way of working, a complex way of practicing. And I just, again, to say a huge thank you to all of you for sharing that with us, and also to Wising to putting on the show, and to opening this afternoon up. It's been wonderful. Thank you.